No one expected this, as the Toronto Maple Leafs have made even more moves, and this one is shocking. Easton Cowan, he's been sent down to the OHL, which means he is not going to be on the Maple Leafs opening night roster. We're going to break down what this means going forward for the Leafs, as this has serious implications on not only the moves they're going to make in the next couple of hours, but also just in the outlook of the start of the season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, but before we get into it, quick reminder, hit that subscribe button. If you're part of the 70% who aren't subscribed, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content, so make sure to hit that button. We're on the road to 14,000 subscribers, and if you're part of that 71%, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But Darius, we have a lot to go over today. Obviously, earlier in the day, the Leafs signed Max Pacioretty and Steven Lawrence. They are now a couple hours away from the deadline for their rosters to get finalized, so more moves are on the horizon, but this gives us some interesting insight, and it's also just a shocking move in itself. And the move is Easton Cowan. He's been sent and loaned to the London Knights of the OHL, and this one came in surprising fashion. If you would have told either of us this a couple of weeks ago, we would have thought for sure that Easton Cowan would have at least started the season with the Toronto Maple Leafs, gotten his 8 or 9 games in, and then obviously manipulate the service time and send him back down to the London Knights because he cannot play for the Marlies. But after Steven Lawrence and Max Pacioretty, after the signings of those two guys, Easton Cowan is the odd man out, and it makes sense now when you look at it from a cap perspective, which I have a video on later. But Easton Cowan, he's not going to be playing with the Maple Leafs and won't get that experience to start the season at least, though he can go and play these 8 or 9 games anytime during the season.
Yeah, which is not favorable for the Toronto Maple Leafs because you'd like to see this player get that experience of playing a couple games. We saw with Fraser Minton last year, and of course he missed a bunch of camp this year, or I guess, the entire camp after rookie camp this year, which is not great because you want to see these players get that experience. But, if you had asked me a month ago, like you said, if this was the result, how would I feel about it? I'd be pretty shocked, right? That Easton Cowan would not be starting the year with the Leafs except, or at least for 8 or 9 games, right? Until that December deadline or whenever it is that he would have to go back. But I knew at some point he would be playing with the London Knights this year, right? And personally, I saw the London Knights play on Saturday in Brampton, the new Brampton Steelheads, and Easton Cowan wasn't there, and of course he gets sent back just a few days later, so that's unfortunate. But this is good for his development. I think again, when you look at him offensively, right? Not much for him to learn in the OHL, but he's going to go back and learn the fine details of the game and his defensive game too. He's going to work on that. And we heard Craig Berube talk a lot about that when he was up with the club just a couple of weeks ago, heading into preseason, obviously his preseason games, that he wanted the player to work on those things. And they were putting him in really unfavorable positions for him. They were really making it difficult for him to make the team. And unfortunately, he didn't. But again, the Leafs signed, Lawrence, like we talked about, and Pacioretty, we did not see coming to PTO. So with those guys coming in, it was very difficult for Cowan to make this team. And again, you don't want him just, straggling along on maybe the fourth line or anything like that, just to have him around. It's not good for his development. So I think this is the best case scenario. And you know what? At any point, any way during this season, he was going to end up back in the OHL anyway.
Yeah, and again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. I mean, yeah, he might not. Obviously, you mentioned the December deadline there. Maybe they call him up at some point before that if any injuries happen. But it seems at this point, he's going to be on the OHL team for the foreseeable future here. And Easton Cowan officially doesn't make the Leafs out of camp, was in a tough spot, but ultimately didn't do enough. Now he goes to junior to dominate and start for Canada at the World Juniors, and the big goal of getting redemption at the Memorial Cup. So it seems like, according to these insiders, the Leafs have no plans for Easton Cowan really this year at the NHL level, which makes sense given the competitive nature of the camp. I mean, neither of us expected Steven Lawrence to come in, play as good as he did, practice as hard as he did, and get as much praise as he did throughout the entire training camp now into the preseason. No one really expected that, and he obviously earned his spot. He got his contract. And then Max Pacioretty, I think it just comes down to, this is the year that the Leafs want to make a big push, especially over the next 2 to 3 years. They obviously have Tanev, OEL, all these contracts that are aging but are still in their primes now. They want to go out, and I'm not saying Max Pacioretty's in his prime now by any means, but he provides a bit more stability to that fourth line or third line, wherever. He's probably going to play in the third line, actually, depending wherever he plays. And I think for a guy like Craig Berube, he probably would have preferred, and ultimately they did prefer, Max Pacioretty, knowing what they're going to give him. Pacioretty obviously had a pretty good camp as well. And Brett Schilling shared these thoughts a few days ago. He said, you want to do what's right for the long term. And he was asked about his first round pick, Easton Cowan, in 2023, and what their plan is for the future. So Darius, it seems like unless Easton Cowan would have came out and completely shown out in the preseason, completely showed out in camp, but he wasn't really given a favorable spot there in the preseason, aside from one game, his last one in the preseason, for him to really shine and be given that ability and given the chance and the opportunity to really shine. It just wasn't going to happen for Easton Cowan. And I also don't think, quite frankly, he played good enough to deserve an opening night spot. As unfortunate as it sounds, Pacioretty, I don't know if Pacioretty necessarily outplayed him. He obviously had the 2-goal game. Other than that, he's been kind of as mid, but he's a veteran. He's been around for a while, and he can help elevate that fourth line.
And they know what they're getting in Max Pacioretty too, right? Like when you look at his body of work, and obviously he came to the city in Toronto during the summer to work out for the Leafs. So obviously they knew exactly what they were getting in him. And Easton Cowan's a bit of a wild card, especially like I said, if he's kind of tagging along on the fourth line or something like that. Like it's not good for his development. And I thought that was a good point in that tweet there as well, that, you know, he's going to be sent back now, and there's a possibility for him to stay with London because they're still going to be a pretty good team this year, or they could trade him to a team that's, you know, a bona fide contender, and he can go for another OHL championship or Memorial Cup and gain that experience. And of course, Team Canada, right? So the trade might come probably after the World Juniors, closer to the trade deadline in the OHL, if that were to happen. But again, he can go to the World Juniors, get that experience as well. He's going to be playing with a lot of really good other prospects, and hopefully he shines there. But, you know, you made a good point there that they put him in, you know, situations that weren't favorable for him on purpose to see if he kind of rised above that. And he didn't, right? He did not play good enough to, you know, beat somebody out for their job. And, you know, it's not really his fault either. He's still young. He has lots to learn. He'll be back for sure. But the type of player he is, he should be playing in maybe the top six or maybe the third line. If you're just going to have him around and kind of put him in the lineup every other game, maybe, or every couple games on the fourth line, doesn't make sense for him because he's not going to learn anything. So besides being around the team, which is a good thing, which is why I thought originally he would get those 8 or 9 games, but it's not going to happen. And again, I think this is the best case scenario for his development anyway, because yes, he tore up the league last year. Like there's not much more you can do if you're Easton Cowan in the OHL. Like there's literally not much more you can do besides winning the Memorial Cup, but there are certain aspects of the game that he can work on that when he comes back next year, maybe he does make the team. So I think this was the scenario that was going to play out anyway, barring, you know, maybe 9 games to start the year.
Yeah, and Brad Treliving, like we'll discuss in tonight's video later. He made a very competitive camp out of this, and ultimately Cowan was the odd one out. They're trying to win games right now from the jump, and they're positioned pretty well to do that. And Craig Berube called Easton Cowan over, we think way back to the start of training camp, for a chat at the end of Leafs skate. The message was, play his game, play simple, get the pucks out, play north, just play my game and good things will come. So I'm really excited for tonight. And obviously we know that Easton Cowan, we covered that earlier on in the offseason, that he's had ambitions of starting with the Maple Leafs, even making the team, breaking at a camp and staying past the 8 or 9 games. We also think back to Grabenkin. Ultimately, neither of the two young prospects, young stars for the Leafs are going to factor in, at least at the start of the season. They have so many guys. In the preseason, he had 5 games, 2 assists, 5 shot on goals. Not the greatest stats, but it did look impactful. Do you think he'll make the team next year? I think next year is a much more likely goal, but you mentioned it. I mean, 96 points last season with the Knights, year before 53, really had his breakout year this year. And I'm very excited to see ultimately what he does going forward for the Toronto Maple Leafs, because again, at the time of the draft, he was considered a stretch. And now just a couple years later, he's now one of the top prospects in all hockey, and especially for the Leafs. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him. But Darius, more moves are on the horizon for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and it starts with Easton Cowan getting sent down. When you're looking now at the outlook of what this means for 5 p.m. Eastern in a couple hours here, it seems that ultimately some other things are happening, maybe surrounding Cal Yarncroc being sent to the LTIR, but we'll have a full video on that coming out soon once those moves are finalized. And the Leafs are doing some very interesting things and a bit of a Brad Treliving masterclass so far. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this Easton Cowan move, and we'll see you guys later.